Unfortunately for me, it's time to cover the most disappointing Xbox 360 launch title, Perfect Dark Zero. Perfect Dark Zero. Oh boy, where do we start with this one? Perfect Dark Zero is the prequel to the iconic N64 exclusive first-person shooter Perfect Dark. Developed by Rare as the spiritual successor to GoldenEye, Rare took everything about GoldenEye and improved on it. Players take on the role of Joanna Dark, agent of the Carrington Institute, as she goes on several missions to stop rival corporation Datadyne from doing some crazy batshit conspiracy stuff. The Carrington Institute and Datadyne both have ties to separate alien races that are at war with each other, and Datadyne is attempting to give some hidden technology over to their reptile-like alien friends in order for them to become the biggest corporation on the planet and take over the world.
Of course!
But the aliens are actually double-crossing Datadyne and securing what turns out to be a planet-destroying weapon that they plan to turn onto Earth. Like I said, the plot is batshit insane, and I'm just scratching the surface. After dominating the N64 era, Rare continued on with their Nintendo partnership and shifted focus to developing for the GameCube. Rare went on to develop only one game for the GameCube, the terrible Star Fox Adventures. The game released on September 23, 2002, and just one day later, it was announced that Microsoft had acquired the development studio for $375 million. As part of the deal, Rare was no longer able to develop games using Nintendo's IP, but could continue to develop games that used Rare's original IP. Out of this, we got Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Conquer Live and Reloaded, and two games set for the upcoming Xbox 360 launch, Cameo Elements of Power and Perfect Dark Zero. Xbox thought Perfect Dark Zero would be the big killer app that would get people to buy an Xbox 360. It was marketed everywhere with ads, demos, and in-store kiosks. Xbox made sure that anyone who was even remotely interested in the Xbox 360 knew about Perfect Dark Zero. They even went so far as to call it a Halo killer. I really want to know what the hell they were smoking, because damn, that must be some good shit. The marketing paid off. Over 1 million copies were sold in the first year of the Xbox 360, and pretty much unfortunately for everyone who bought this game, it didn't play as well once you actually got your hands on it. Even though the industry reviewers were lining up to give it the most succulent review blowjobs imaginable, the game just felt awful to play. It feels dated immediately, kind of like you're playing an N64 game, but with a thick coat of Xbox 360 paint. You know, it's basically the same problem that New Coke had. Sure, it's pretty good in a quick little taste test at the store, but no one wants to drink a whole can. All right, so let's just jump into the story. The story is a mess. First off, there's no backstory or exposition. There's no explanation of the characters, the setting, or, well, anything. So either you already know everything there is to know about Perfect Dark, or, well, you're shit out of luck. Set in an alternate 2020, a young Joanna Dark is a bounty hunter working with her father Jack to rescue a kidnapped researcher. They're supported by their hacker friend Chandra, who has quite possibly the worst rendition of a French accent.
Word of mouth has it he's at this offshore research facility. Look familiar to you?
Also, I just gotta point out that this bitch said word of mouse. They rescue the researcher from this Jackie Chan movie villain who does a matrix dive out of a window to escape. Then the scientist implants some research data into Jack's head and calls it collateral to ensure his safety, but pretty soon after, Jack ends up getting captured and the scientist gets killed when dude from earlier shows up in the gunship. Joanna infiltrates the mansion of Datadyne's leader in order to find her father. Zhang Li, the leader of Datadyne, is hosting a tournament for fighters in this virtual world that he's created. Joanna ends up squaring off against his daughter Mayhem, and that's Mayhem. Jack dies but gives Joanna the information. Then Joanna goes to find a doctor and Chandra betrays her. Joanna joins the Carrington Institute and travels to Peru to meet Daniel Carrington.
He's a disgruntled Scottish guard known for his lethal temper and his unusual eating habits. He weighs a metric ton. His name? Fat Bastard.
Their mission is to stop Mayhem and Zhang Li from activating a device deep underground known as the Grawl. Joanna kills Mayhem, then confronts Zhang Li, who uses the device to turn into handsome Squidward. She kills him, and then the game just ends.
You okay?
I could use an aspirin. So, boss, how'd I do?
Perfect. The presentation immediately smacks you across the face with the cheesy mid-2000s vibe. The menus aren't even in widescreen ratio, so yeah, these are just stuck at 4:3. The menus are also themed after 2000s tech, and they're sponsored by Samsung. Throughout some of the levels, you'll find zip lines that you can ride to reach distant locations. Doing so whips the camera to this action shot of Joanna riding it, and the camera freaks the fuck out when you finally reach the end. In some of the cutscenes, including one of the first ones, Joanna is using binoculars, and the binocular view shows the left and right triggers for the zoom in and zoom out. And this happens multiple times throughout the game during cutscenes where you don't even have any controls over the camera. Joanna herself looks like she has posters of Avril Lavigne covering her walls. The character models look blocky and misshapen, and the animations are stiff as hell. The whole thing just gives me this feeling of Totally Spies crossed with Food Fight. The gameplay is also full of problems. The camera has this awful FOV with no way to actually change it. The controls are floaty as all hell. Of course, this game has to have that same fucking problem with acceleration that games used to have in their aiming systems. So whenever you press the joystick, it takes a moment to really start moving, making it feel kinda unresponsive. But once you let go, it keeps drifting until it decelerates to a stop. I actually thought that I had some like stick drift or something going on with my controller. After all, this thing is about 15 years old. But no, it's the deceleration that's programmed into the game. And even with turning up the sensitivity from the default 50 to 65, the aiming is so slow that I can't keep up with the enemies running horizontally. And if the floaty aiming controls weren't enough, the same problem happens with your character as you move the left stick. There's no precise control since the aiming and the moving both feel sluggish and floaty at the same time. And for some reason, they decided that anytime you get shot, Joanna will slide around the floor, making it impossible to keep aiming, and actually can make it to where you can't navigate the environment because you're getting slid all around as you take bullets. There's this laughable implementation of a cover system. If you approach certain walls, you can press A to get into cover, and the camera will switch to a third-person mode, but you can't move while you're on the cover. Why? To be fair, this was a year before Gears of War and a few months before Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, so cover systems hadn't exactly been figured out. Oh, and the game has the most pathetic excuse for a dodge roll imaginable. There's a pretty good collection of guns in this game, and each has a secondary ability that you can activate with the right bumper. Some guns, this means just adding a suppressor, but some guns, like the laptop, will deploy as a sentry gun. It all sounds cool, but you're never really faced with a challenge requiring the use of different weapons. Apparently, there's also a tertiary ability for all the weapons, but I didn't see it in any tutorials, and I only saw a passive mention of it on a loading screen one time, without any instruction on how to actually use it. Between missions, you can select your loadout. I just stuck with the base pistol and the SMG for the entire playthrough. That's pretty much all you need. With both guns, you can zoom in and you can snipe enemies. But it took me until about 3/4 of the way through the game to realize that there's no recoil when you shoot. And even aiming into your scope is clunky. Once you pull the trigger, and I mean like immediately when you pull the trigger, you'll be zooming in. There's no animation to show the gun approaching your character's eyes, so it just feels weird when you're immediately scoping in. Compare this to something like Call of Duty. I just couldn't get over how this felt. There's also this sort of cool idea that they tried to do where the amount that you pull the trigger determines how far zoomed in you're gonna be. So if you only pull the trigger about halfway, you'll be zoomed into 2x instead of all the way to full zoom at 4x. Let's be real, if I pulled the trigger, I want to zoom. I don't want to be fighting with the level of zoom when I'm trying to shoot at an enemy. The game definitely wants you to be sneaky as you go around the environments, but I found that really difficult. The environments don't really feel like they lend themselves to a stealthy approach, at least not on your first playthrough. There's just too many wide open spaces and enemies hovering near each other. But hey, I am a dumb, and when it comes to stealth in games, I suck at it. So take this all with a grain of salt. Navigating the environments and figuring out where you're supposed to go is a real pain in the ass, and the developers clearly knew this because they ended up adding in a blue arrow on the ground that shows you what direction you're supposed to go. It basically leads you all the way around the level so you don't have to do any navigation for yourself. But it also seems to get confused too, and sometimes just takes me around in circles. Chalk this game up to one of those where the fuck do I go kind of games. There are also moments throughout the game where you have to use gadgets that Joanna must pull straight out of her ass because there's no way they fit into these tight pants. There's this drone that you drive around with its disorienting fisheye lens. You'll use this a total of 2 times in the game. There are also these 2 different mini games, one for hacking, which involves this Simon looking device. All you have to do is wait for the blue segment to get highlighted, then you press the A button while avoiding the red segments. It's Child's Play. The other minigame happens when you go to place down an explosive, and it's the easiest pipe game ever. I'd rather play the Powerpuff Girls pipe game that was on CartoonNetwork.com than this trash. But hey, if there's one thing Rare does well, even when they fuck up everything else, it's the sound design. The music in this game is this really chaotic mix of dark synth, funk, club tracks, and butt rock. It's really jarring, but when one of the good songs hits, I kind of just want to sit and listen to it. And let's be honest, Rare's games always have the best reload and suppressor sound effects. But on the multiplayer front, Xbox marketed Perfect Dark Zero as a Halo killer, a statement that is an absolute fucking joke. The mode features 50 players, an insane amount for a console in 2005, but the infrastructure could barely handle 15. So people just found laggy matches with terrible hit detection, and eventually everyone figured out that you could just avoid being hit by dodge rolling, so everyone was just dodge rolling around the entire map. The whole thing was ridiculous, and those with a functioning brain immediately abandoned ship for the vastly superior Call of Duty 2. Perfect Dark Zero may have sold over 1 million copies in the first year, but that was entirely on the hype of the marketing and Rare's reputation, not on the quality of the game. Being a first-party game, it's still one of Xbox's IPs that they try to remind people was great, even if no one actually thinks it was. In 2006, development began on a 2-part sequel to the original Perfect Dark called Perfect Dark Core and Perfect Dark Vengeance, but those were ultimately canceled when Microsoft was disappointed in the sales of Perfect Dark Zero, which is kind of mind-blowing to hear that the sales were disappointing. But remember, the original Perfect Dark sold 3.4 million copies on the Nintendo 64, and that wasn't even a console launch title. A remaster of the original Perfect Dark was released in 2010 on the Xbox Live Arcade, then absolutely nothing was heard until 2018 when Xbox formed The Initiative, a new internal studio dedicated to the Perfect Dark franchise. At the 2020 Game Awards, Xbox and The Initiative unveiled the soft sequel C-boot reboot titled Perfect Dark. The game was canceled in 2025 as part of Xbox's long-running company tradition of absolutely fumbling the bag at every turn, so we will probably never see another Perfect Dark game. It's been 20 years and all we're left with is a great N64 Perfect Dark game and the terrible Perfect Dark game that was a disappointing prequel included in the launch of the Xbox 360. It's a little hard to believe it, but it's already been 20 years since the launch of the Xbox 360 all the way back in November of 2005. So I decided to revisit all of the titles available at the launch of the Xbox 360, and because there are 17 games to play and revisit, I enlisted the help of my buddy Gloom is Dead. He makes incredibly thoughtful and introspective reviews of games from the golden era. If you want to see more, you can find a link to our playlist covering all 17 games in the pinned comment below.